Welcome, everyone, to the 10th deep dive in our Arthashastra series.
Great to be back.
Today, we're really digging into Part X of the source material. This is the big one on foreign policy, Kautilya's whole framework.
That's right. It's something you flagged as really wanting to understand the core principles, how states should interact, alliances, warfare, all of that.
Exactly. And our mission, as always, is to pull out the most crucial ideas from this ancient text, but present them in a way that's, well, clear and hopefully engaging.
And right off the bat, what really jumps out in Part X is this fundamental idea. A state's well-being, its welfare, it doesn't happen in a vacuum.
Right. Isolation isn't the answer.
Not at all. Kautilya insists that an active foreign policy, a really well thought out one, is absolutely essential. And we'll see how he connects all the different approaches. Peace, war, neutrality. They're not separate boxes. They're all linked.
Okay, let's dive into that interconnectedness then.
Yeah.
He introduces this key concept, the circle of states.
The Mandela theory, yeah.
Can you paint a picture of that for us? It's like a wheel.
Sort of. Imagine the conqueror, the ambitious king, the Vijigishu, they're at the hub, the center of this wheel.
Okay.
Then their allies are like the rim, way out on the edge. And the spokes connecting them, that's the territory, often hostile territory, lying in between.
That's a powerful image.
Yeah.
So what are the practical implications? How does a ruler use this model?
Well, think about it. If you're surrounded directly by enemies, you're vulnerable, right? But this model suggests you leverage alliances beyond your immediate neighbors. You leapfrog them. Use those allies on the rim, connected by those spokes, to put pressure back on the enemies closer to you.
So it's about creating strategic depth and pressure points.
Exactly. It's a dynamic tool for understanding the whole regional power play, not just who's next door. It emphasizes that your security really extends far beyond your borders.
Now, here's where it gets, well, pretty stark. Kautilya doesn't shy away from the tough stuff, does he? Especially conflict.
Not at all. He's very pragmatic. He suggests that sometimes, the complete destruction of an enemy might actually be necessary.
Even if it costs a lot.
Even at a high cost to your own state. It's a calculation. The long-term benefit of removing that persistent threat, ensuring future stability, maybe it outweighs the immediate losses of war.
It forces a ruler to think about the long game.
Definitely. Even when the short-term hit is significant.
Okay, moving from outright destruction to agreements. The text talks about fairness in treaties.
Yes, this is interesting. He suggests peace is preferable if the benefits are shared equitably. Doesn't matter if the kings are strong, weak, or equal.
But then he immediately says war is better than an unfair agreement. Seems a bit contradictory.
It does at first glance, but it speaks to long-term stability again. An unfair treaty, one where a state feels exploited. That just breeds resentment. It plants the seeds for future conflict because that state will look for any chance to overturn it.
So a costly war now might be better than accepting terms that guarantee future instability.
That seems to be the calculation Kautilya is presenting. It's about sustainable outcomes, not just immediate peace at any price.
It's probably important here to add a bit of context. Kautilya isn't really talking about specific historical kings or empires, is he?
No, not really. The text clarifies it's mainly theoretical. It focuses on the concept of the state, and the king, this Vijigishu, the one who desires to conquer, as representing the national interest. It's abstract.
And that theoretical approach is why it still resonates, maybe. It's about the underlying dynamics.
I think so. By focusing on the archetype, the fundamental drives of state security, the framework becomes potentially applicable across different times and places. It's about the mechanics of power.
Though the geographical scope he had in mind was quite specific.
Yes, the source material is pretty clear on that. His primary focus is the Indian subcontinent, basically from the Himalayas down to the sea. His analysis is really grounded in the interactions within that region.
Makes sense. That was his world.
It's where his advice would have been most directly applicable, dealing with the kinds of states and challenges prevalent there.
Okay, so a fundamental guideline seems to be make peace with equals or superiors, wage war on the weaker. Sounds simple enough.
It does sound simple, but like everything with Kautilya, the text immediately starts piling on exceptions and nuances.
Okay. So it's not a hard and fast rule.
Not at all. That's where the real strategic thinking comes in. That guideline is just a starting point. Things like, the internal state of your enemy, how reliable your allies are, what your specific goals are. All these things can mean you deviate from that basic principle. It's about adaptability.
And another big factor that keeps cropping up is calamities. Natural disasters, internal unrest.
Exactly. These things shake up the power balance. They can weaken the conqueror's own state, or they can weaken rivals, creating both dangers and, well, opportunities.
So a smart ruler has to watch for these vulnerabilities.
Absolutely, both their own and their rivals. A state weakened by famine or rebellion might suddenly become an easy target. Or a powerful neighbor dealing with internal chaos might be less likely to cause trouble for you. It's about recognizing and maybe even exploiting that instability.
Cotilia apparently starts by just broadly saying states are hostile or friendly, but then he moves beyond that.
Yeah, that initial split is maybe too simple for practical strategy. The text indicates he refines this into more useful classifications.
Why the refinement?
Because reality is complex, isn't it? Just saying friend or foe doesn't capture the nuances. Relationships shift. Maybe they're rivals in one area, but potential partners in another. His later categories likely factor in things like geography, economics, history, internal stability, allowing for much more targeted policies.
And this practicality really comes through when he advises weaker kings, right? He contrasts his advice with earlier teachers.
Very much so. He warns a weak king against both extremes. Don't just roll over and submit spinelessly because you'll be exploited, but also don't engage in reckless heroics that will just get your state destroyed.
So what's the alternative?
Policies that prioritize survival, preserve your strength, wait for opportunities, find ways to outmaneuver stronger players through intelligence and careful, calculated risks. It's about strategic patience.
What's really striking is how he presents all this. It's not just a list of tips. It's presented as a powerful theoretical framework.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that. It avoids just telling stories or listing historical examples. It's focused on laying out the principles, the underlying logic of state interaction.
That systematic approach is what gives it weight.
It elevates it beyond just advice. It becomes a tool for thinking about foreign relations, identifying the key variables, structuring decisions.
And to build this framework, he uses specialized language. The text even suggests he might have invented some terms.
It does suggest that, yeah, he needed precise terms for different types of rulers, alliances, types of war. But it also cautions that some terms, especially for the 6 main methods of foreign policy, have subtleties.
So just knowing the dictionary definition isn't enough.
Probably not. You need to understand the context, the nuance, how he uses the term in different situations.
And adding another layer of difficulty, the source material itself acknowledges translation challenges. Different scholars sometimes interpret passages quite differently.
That's always a factor with ancient texts, isn't it? Language changes, cultural context is different. It just means we need to be aware, maybe consult different translations, look at scholarly discussions to get a fuller picture.
Okay, let's get into some foundational principles then. The core idea seems to be that the state welfare depends on choosing between non-intervention or overt action, sama and vayama.
That's the fundamental duality. Sama, non-intervention, is about building confidence, often linked to peace treaties, even treaties involving hostages. Vyama is the active policy, taking overt steps, and the ultimate goal.
Yogashima. Security and prosperity.
Right, both security and expansion or prosperity. So Sama and Vyama are the means to achieve Yogashima.
Now, the preference for peace sama is strong, but with that crucial condition we mentioned, fairness.
Yes. The benefits of a treaty need to be seen as fair by everyone involved, strong or weak. If they are, even a weak king should pursue peace. Peace is also favored if war isn't likely to change the power balance much anyway.
And war.
War, vigraha, is generally recommended only against weaker opponents, where the gains are likely to outweigh the costs. It's about cost-effective expansion.
Interestingly, there are even ethical considerations mentioned. Attacking an unrighteous king over a righteous one.
Yeah, and behaving justly towards allies and even conquered rulers. It might seem surprising in such a pragmatic text, but it suggests Cotilia saw the value of legitimacy. Just conduct could mean less resistance, more stable alliances, contributing to that long-term state welfare.
Okay, let's unpack the 6 main methods, the shagunya. The first is samdi, peace. But it's more than just no fighting, right?
Much more. It includes formal treaties with specific conditions, yes, but also just non-intervention, giving hostages, all used strategically, maybe to achieve neutrality or strengthen an alliance or gain some other advantage. The text stresses the whole cycle, making treaties, keeping them, breaking them, renegotiating them.
Breaking them.
Oh, yes. It's all part of the toolkit. Treaties are instruments, not sacred vows, it seems.
Okay, method 2. Vigaraha, hostilities.
And this isn't just open battle, it's classified. Open war, secret war like surprise attacks and undeclared war, using spies, clandestine operations, maybe sabotage.
And diplomatic attacks.
Exactly. Mantra Yuddha, a diplomatic offensive trying to undermine the enemy through propaganda or intrigue, is also seen as part of Vigraha, especially against weaker kings or to soften them up. So war covers everything, from diplomacy to the battlefield.
Third method, Yana, marching or preparing for war.
Right, the detailed tactics are in another book, but the decision to mobilize to prepare for an expedition, that's considered a foreign policy method in itself here.
Just the preparation sends a message.
It's a strong message. It demonstrates resolve, creates a threat, gets resources ready. It's a strategic move, even if you don't end up fighting.
Fourth is asana, staying quiet, indifference.
This is when you judge that neither you nor your potential enemy can really hurt each other significantly. Maybe you're roughly equal in power, or the costs of conflict are too high for both.
So you just wait.
Essentially, watchful waiting. Focus internally. Observe the other side for weakness, but don't get entangled unnecessarily. Maintain the status quo when action is too risky or offers little gain.
Fifth, samsraya, seeking protection.
This is when you're threatened and vulnerable. You turn to a stronger king for help, or you rely heavily on strong fortifications. It's an admission of weakness, seeking external support or strong defense for survival.
But it implies dependence.
It certainly does. You might owe obligations to your protector. It's a necessary strategy sometimes, but not without risks.
And the sixth method, Devadahava, the dual policy.
This is more complex. It means making peace with one neighbor, specifically so you can wage war on another neighbor, possibly with the first one's help.
Playing rivals off against each other.
Pretty much. It's leveraging alliances opportunistically. Make peace here to enable war there. High risk, potentially high reward, requires careful maneuvering.
The text then briefly mentions the role of providential events alongside human actions, like fate or chance.
Kind of. It acknowledges that unpredictable things happen, floods, plagues, sudden deaths, and these can mess up the best laid plans. A good policy has to be adaptable, always reassessing in light of these unforeseen events, but still aiming for the state's welfare.
Kautilya then refines the idea of enemies. It's not just one category.
No, he breaks it down. There are inherently hostile ones, maybe based on history or location. There are those who are vulnerable because of calamities. Some are easily destroyable, weak, no allies. Others can only be harassed because they do have strong allies.
And he distinguishes natural enemies like neighbors from those who are antagonistic by intent.
Yes. The neighbor might be an enemy simply due to proximity and competing interests. Natural enemy. Others might become enemies because they actively oppose you, or someone induces them to oppose you. Antagonists by intent. Understanding why someone is an enemy helps determine the best strategy against them.
And for the conqueror, the Vijigishu, he outlines three kinds of power.
Right. Intellectual power strategy, wisdom. Physical power, the army, resources. And psychological power, energy, morale, influence.
And which is most important?
Intellectual power. Kautilya consistently emphasizes that the ability to think strategically, to analyze, to outwit opponents, that's the ultimate key to success. More so than just having a big army.
Okay, so how does he connect these methods to specific situations? When do you use which one?
He gives guidelines. Samdhi, peace, is generally for when you're in relative decline or weaker. Vigraha, hostilities, is for when you're clearly superior. Asana, indifference, is for when you're evenly matched and can't hurt each other easily.
And the others?
Yana, preparation for war, is when you have some special advantages, maybe better terrain, or your enemy is distracted. Samsraya, seeking protection, is when you're depleted or facing major threats. And the Vadipava, dual policy, is useful specifically to weaken an enemy by teaming up with someone else against them.
So it's all about assessing your relative strength and the situation.
Precisely. It's a framework for rational calculation based on context.
He even talks about situations where you might make progress without war or peace.
Yeah, like if an enemy's population is unhappy but too scared of the chaos of war to actually defect to you, in that case, maybe neither open war nor a formal peace treaty is right. You might need a kind of temporary standoff, a non-hostile state, while you wait for circumstances to change.
It's very nuanced.
Extremely. He explores counterintuitive scenarios, too. Like a stronger king might sue for peace if they're suffering more from internal calamities than the weaker enemy.
Or a weaker king might actually start a war.
Under very specific conditions, yes. Maybe if they're caught between two equally hostile neighbors who also hate each other, or if they see a fleeting opportunity. Even powerful kings might need to seek protection, samsraya, or use a dual policy, devadhibhava, if facing a unique threat or seeing a strategic opening. It's all about adapting to the specifics.
Let's talk more about peacemaking, Samdi. The text outlines 4 aspects.
Yes. Wanting peace when it's absent, actually respecting treaties once made, violating treaties strategically, and then renegotiating broken ones.
Highlighting them again.
It's consistently pragmatic. The desire for peace itself involves calculating prospects, consequences, obligations, all based on relative strength. It's a process, not just a state.
And war, Vigraha, we know, is open, secret, or undeclared. When does he say it's right to actually declare war?
He lists conditions. Enemy weakness is key calamities, disunity, economic problems. Also, if you can gain significant resources or if you need to protect your allies. And timing is crucial strike when the enemy isn't fully mobilized or is otherwise distracted.
What about fighting with allies?
That's covered too. Joint campaigns with weaker, equal, or stronger allies. And crucially, principles for how to share the gains afterwards, always a tricky point in alliances.
Who should you primarily attack?
The natural enemy is often the focus. Also, rulers who have weak support from their own subjects, easier to defeat. And there are careful considerations. If your neighbors are suffering the same calamities as you are, might not be the best time to stir things up.
What about seeking help, Samsraya, from stronger kings?
He outlines principles but also warns about the dangers. Getting too close to a much stronger power can be risky, except maybe during wartime when you need them. Ideally, choose a protector who actually seems to favor you personally.
And if there's no good protector?
Then, as an exception, you might even have to make peace with your enemy if that's the only way to survive. He also discusses choosing between 2 potential strong protectors who's more capable, who might act as a better buffer state against other threats.
And that complex idea of using your natural enemy as a temporary ally.
Yes, to attack a third king. It's possible, but only if you've secured your own rear and the potential gains clearly outweigh the risks of collaborating with your usual rival. Needs very careful assessment.
Now, envoys. They seem incredibly important in this system.
Absolutely vital. They aren't just messengers. Their duties include gathering intelligence, maintaining the terms of treaties, trying to stir up trouble and dissension in the enemy's court, outright espionage.
So, diplomats and spies rolled into one.
Pretty much. The text details their qualifications, preparation, mental and physical, how they should behave at the foreign court, delivering messages effectively, reading the king's mood, handling bad news diplomatically, gathering intel through double agents, maybe using entertainers or merchants as cover, and always protecting their own king's secrets.
What if an envoy gets detained? Held against their will?
Coutillia analyzes the likely motivations for that. Is the foreign king anticipating trouble back home? Trying to fix their own weaknesses before letting the envoy report back? Are they trying to incite an attack on the envoy's state? Or obstruct your alliances, disrupt your campaigns? Understanding the why is key to figuring out the response.
What about dealing with defectors, people who left your side and now want to come back?
That's complex too. He categorizes them based on why they left and why they're returning. There are principles for accepting or rejecting them, and serious precautions if you do take back someone potentially untrustworthy. You can't just welcome them with open arms.
Let's talk treaties again. Equal versus unequal.
Right. Based on bargaining power, the general principle seems to be payment according to power. The stronger party gets more concessions, but
there are exceptions.
always exceptions. Situations might force you to accept an unequal treaty even if you're stronger, or offer one even if you're weaker, maybe due to immediate threats or some long-term strategic goal.
Can you choose to give up benefits now for bigger gains later?
Yes, that's considered, but you have to weigh factors like how much bigger is the future benefit? How certain is it? What's the relationship with the other state like? It's about calculated long-term investment versus immediate return.
What about demanding more than agreed upon in a treaty?
That's also discussed as a potential tactic. Maybe to deliberately provoke the other side into breaking the treaty, or just to harass them, or maybe to preempt an attack you think they're planning. Again, treaties are tools.
And for the negotiator involved in all this?
Self-assessment is crucial. They need to know their own capabilities, their skill, their soundness or integrity, their likely productivity, their resolve, and the level of support they have back home before responding to offers or making demands. Know thyself, essentially.
What if you and your enemy are both helping the same third party, like a neutral king?
Coutillia analyzes this. His conclusion: helping your actual friend yields greater benefits in the long run than trying to curry favor with someone who might also be helped by your enemy. Loyalty pays off.
What about lending troops to another ruler?
Risky business. especially if you doubt their intentions. Cotilia suggests precautions, like maybe lending only your less reliable troops or even secretly forming alliances against the borrower just in case they try to misuse your soldiers.
Always thinking defensively.
Always anticipating betrayal, it seems.
And for a weaker king who's under attack and forced into a treaty,
He classifies those treaties based on what's surrendered, yourself or your army, your treasury, or your territory. And there are specific types within those, like a treaty where you become a hostage yourself, or one where you just pay them off, or one where you cede land. Different levels of submission.
finally, hostages. They seem central to treaty making.
Very much so. Giving and receiving hostages. The text discusses who makes a good hostage. Usually sons of the ruler are preferred. And then, quite remarkably, it details clandestine ways to liberate your hostages using spies, agents disguised as entertainers, attendants.
Wow, so even hostage-taking wasn't the end of the story.
Apparently not. There were countermoves. It also discusses what happens if a liberated hostage is recaptured and how the king who gave the hostage should respond. It's an intricate part of the diplomatic game.
Well, this deep dive into Part X foreign policy has certainly revealed an incredibly sophisticated and, as you said, remarkably pragmatic framework.
It really is. From the circle of states idea to the detailed application of those 6 methods, the thinking around treaties, alliances, it offers these enduring insights into power politics and how states interact.
The sheer emphasis on intellectual power, that strategic calculation of gains and losses, and just the deep understanding of human motivation, it really underscores why this ancient text still feels relevant.
Absolutely. We've seen how Kautilya advises navigating this complex world of friends and foes, but always, always with that sharp focus on preserving and advancing the state's interests, that yogic shima.
It makes you think, doesn't it? How might Kautilya analyze today's global alliances, using his wheel analogy?
Yeah.
How would he view current geopolitics through that lens of power dynamics and national interest?
That's a fascinating thought experiment. And the discussion on envoys, the diplomacy, the intelligence gathering it, raises timeless ethical questions, doesn't it? That balance between asserting your interests and maintaining some kind of stable international order.
And finally, those principles around treaties. The preference for fairness, but also the strategic use of unequal agreements when necessary. It really makes you reflect on the foundations of international law, that constant tension between raw power and the idea of justice in global affairs.
It's an intricate system built for its time, but the underlying principles about power, interest, strategy, human nature, they provide such a rich basis for understanding how nations continue to interact. Definitely worth exploring these concepts further and thinking about how they might apply today. The first path discussed is actually progress through peace.
Peace, okay. But not just like sitting around hoping for the best.
No, not at all. It's presented as a very deliberate choice, a rational one, made under specific conditions.
What kind of condition?
Well, the text suggests peace makes sense if, say, both sides stand to gain equally from it, or, interestingly, if both sides would actually decline equally from conflict, or even if things would just stay the same for both.
So a kind of strategic equilibrium.
Precisely. It's almost like an ancient version of game theory applied to how states should interact. Very strategic, very forward-thinking.
Let's unpack that a bit more, this progress through peace.
Yeah.
You said it's not passive. How does that work? Are we talking about sort of behind-the-scenes maneuvering?
Yes, exactly. It's not just about laying down arms. It involves actively leveraging productive activities, maybe building up your own economy faster than your rival.
Economic competition.
Right, or employing more discrete methods. The text hints at things like maybe enticing skilled workers away from the enemy, or subtly encouraging dissent within their borders, weakening them without an open fight.
So even in peacetime, the strategic game is always on.
Always. It even mentions profiting from shifts elsewhere, like making peace with one neighbor to take advantage of a conflict brewing between 2 others. Peace becomes a proactive tool.
It reminds me a bit of modern economic sanctions, actually, trying to weaken an opponent without declaring outright war.
That's a great parallel. It's a form of peaceful pressure, aimed at progress in your favor, just in a different domain.
Okay, peace as a strategic tool. Fascinating. But inevitably, the discussion has to turn to war. It's not the first option, thankfully, but under what circumstances does the text say, okay, now war is justified?
Well, it's framed as a very carefully weighed decision, not something to rush into.
Needs good reason.
Absolutely. It's seen as justifiable if a king is, say, confident in his own military strength and defenses. That's key.
Makes sense. You need to be able to win.
Or, crucially, if the enemy is already vulnerable, maybe they're dealing with natural disasters, internal strife, rebellions, that sort of thing.
So exploiting weakness.
Yes, or seizing an opportunity. The text talks about starting a war to grab territory, or maybe just disrupt the enemy's plans when they're distracted by something else entirely.
It's very much about timing and relative strength then, a calculated risk assessment.
Exactly, not a knee-jerk reaction at all.
But what if neither peace nor war seems like the right move? I remember the outline mentioning something like achieving progress without war or peace. How does that work? Sounds tricky.
It does, doesn't it? But it's quite pragmatic, really. This state of, let's call it strategic inaction, is recommended when neither side can really hurt the other significantly.
A stalemate, essentially.
Sort of. Or maybe when the enemy is already tied up with major internal problems. Why waste your own resources fighting them if they're already weakening themselves? Or if your attack wouldn't achieve much anyway?
So strategic patience. Let things play out.
Exactly. Save your strength for when it can make a real difference.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's the idea of preparing for war as a way to achieve progress. That sounds a bit counterintuitive. How does just preparing help you advance?
Oh, well, think of it as deterrence and leverage.
Okay.
By building up your military, making clear preparations, having solid plans, you signal strength. Potential enemies might think twice about attacking you. It can be a powerful diplomatic tool, actually.
So readiness might prevent war altogether.
It might. Or it puts you in a much stronger position to negotiate favorable terms. And, of course, if a really good opportunity does arise, you're ready to act decisively. It's like maintaining a strong defense force today. It shows you're serious.
Strength as a deterrent and as readiness. Got it. And the last path mentioned in this initial section was seeking protection. This sounds more like a last resort.
It often is, yes. It's presented as a strategy for a weaker king who just can't protect his own interests effectively at that moment.
Survival mode.
Pretty much. Seeking the umbrella of a more powerful ruler is a way to avoid immediate disaster, maybe being completely wiped out. But the idea isn't permanent submission.
Oh.
No, the underlying thought is that this buys you time. Time to rebuild, maybe make new alliances, gather strength, and eventually work towards regaining your independence and pursuing progress again. It's a strategic retreat, not surrender.
A temporary measure to live and fight another day.
No.
Okay, so those were the basic paths to progress. Now, this dual policy idea really caught my eye. Peace with one enemy, war with another at the same time.
Yes, it's quite sophisticated, isn't it? It's about managing multiple fronts without getting overwhelmed.
How does that work logistically, strategically?
Well, by making peace with one adversary, you effectively neutralize that threat for the time being. You free up resources, military focus, diplomatic energy.
To concentrate on the other enemy.
Exactly. You avoid being caught in a pincer movement, fighting wars on two sides. It's strategic prioritization. Allows you to make diplomatic gains with one while potentially expanding or disrupting another through military means.
It sounds like playing chess on multiple boards simultaneously. Requires real strategic agility.
It certainly does. A real test of a ruler's skill.
Okay, so we have these different methods. Peace, war, inaction, preparation, protection, dual policy. Does the text rank them? Is there a preferred order?
Yes, it offers a comparison, a kind of hierarchy, and one key point is the preference for peace over war if both are likely to achieve similar results.
Why is that?
Because war is inherently risky and costly. Loss of life, draining the treasury, the potential for things to spiral out of control. If peace gets you the same outcome, it's the safer bet.
That seems like common sense, but it's good it's stated explicitly. What else?
Preparing for war is seen as better than just doing nothing, than inaction. It emphasizes being proactive, being ready.
Right, the readiness point again.
And interestingly, the dual policy is considered better than just seeking protection.
Because it keeps you in control. More agency.
Precisely. Seeking protection makes you dependent on another's goodwill and interests. The dual policy, while complex, allows the king to actively pursue his own goals. A proactive stance is definitely valued.
Taking charge of your own fate seems key. Now, crucially, the text points out this isn't a cookie-cutter approach. It depends on your own power, right?
Absolutely. This is where the practical wisdom really comes through. It's not one size fits all.
So how should, say, a weaker king approach things compared to a stronger one?
Weaker kings are advised more caution. They should probably focus attacks only on even weaker neighbors, if at all.
Pick your battles carefully.
Exactly. Seek peace with equals or superiors, and yes, use seeking protection as a necessary survival tool when things get really tough.
And stronger kings.
Well, naturally, they have more options, more aggressive ones. They can initiate wars more readily, employ that dual policy we talked about.
But it's not absolute.
No, and that's vital. Context is everything. The text acknowledges that even a weaker king might sometimes have to reject peace or even start a war against someone stronger if a truly vital interest is threatened. Adaptability is key.
So you always need to read the situation, your relative position, and be flexible.
Okay.
Okay, let's dig into peace and war themselves a bit more. What does peace really mean in this context, beyond just no fighting?
It's more than just a ceasefire. It implies a genuine intention to keep things peaceful. It means respecting treaties, the terms agreed upon.
A commitment.
Yes, and understanding that breaking those agreements or trying to change them unilaterally will have serious consequences. It's about trying to create a stable, predictable order, even if temporary.
And what about war? It's not just one thing either, is it? The text mentions open, secret, and undeclared war.
Right. Different flavors of conflict for different situations. Each has its own strategic advantages.
Okay, like what?
Well, open war is straightforward, decisive conflict. Boots on the ground. Secret war involves covert operations, clandestine stuff, maybe slies, sabotage, stirring up trouble internally for the enemy.
Destabilizing them from within.
Exactly, without necessarily triggering a full-scale response.
Right.
And then undeclared war. That could be even more subtle, maybe using third parties, plausible deniability. The choice depends on your goals, your resources, the enemy's weaknesses, the risks you're willing to take.
Fascinating. And then there's this idea of strategic pauses. You declare war or offer peace, but then
Yeah.
you wait. Why?
Timing. It's all about timing and maximizing your advantage.
Oh, so?
You might declare war, but hold off on the actual invasion because you're waiting for the perfect moment. Maybe the enemy is about to face a famine, or their key ally is distracted.
Or you offer peace terms but delay finalizing things.
Yes, maybe you need time to shore up your own internal situation first. Consolidate power, gather more resources, secure that last alliance. It's using time itself as a weapon, a strategic pause to improve your position before committing fully.
Like pausing the chess clock to think, okay, let's shift to treaties, especially when power isn't equal. What happens then?
Unequal treaties. This is where the pragmatism really bites. A weaker king might face some harsh realities.
Like having to accept bad terms.
Exactly. They might have to accept a treaty that seems unfair, maybe gives up land or resources, simply because the alternative is worse annihilation, perhaps. Or it might be the only way to mitigate an even bigger threat looming elsewhere.
Survival dictates acceptance.
Sometimes. Conversely, a stronger king might offer deliberately unequal terms simply because they can. They know the weaker side has little choice.
And the weaker king might still take the deal.
They might, out of strategic necessity. The text even mentions tactics like demanding more than was originally agreed.
Really? Why do that?
It could be a test of resolve, or a signal you intend to break the treaty later anyway. Or maybe you sense weakness and decide to push for more while you have the chance. It shows that even within a formal agreement, the power dynamics are still very much at play.
Constant assessment, constant negotiation, even after the ink is dry. Okay, what about allies and neutrals? How does the text suggest choosing who to help?
It's quite specific, actually. It lays out criteria for what makes an ally worth supporting.
Oh, like what?
They need to be capable, reliable, productive in their own right, resolute, and, crucially, able to mobilize their own people and resources effectively. Do their subjects support them?
So you don't want to back a losing horse, essentially.
Pretty much. Investing in an ally who lacks these qualities is seen as potentially just draining your own resources for little gain. It's a very results-oriented view.
A tough standard.
Yeah.
And what about neutral players, those middle kings?
They're strategically very important, especially when two big powers are competing for influence.
How do they fit in?
Well, both sides might be trying to win them over. The text suggests the side that offers better, more reliable, help good troops, solid resources, loyalty is more likely to gain their support.
So wooing the neutrals.
Yes, but you also have to be careful. A neutral king's allegiance can shift. If they see the balance of power changing dramatically, they might even become hostile. So managing those relationships, even with those not directly involved, is vital.
Don't just focus on your enemies and immediate allies. Look at the whole board.
Okay, let's dig into that more, dealing with these middle and neutral kings. What's the core strategy?
The main goal is basically to stop them from becoming a threat to you. You either want to neutralize their power or make sure it's kept in check.
How do you do that with a middle king, an influential neighbor?
Well, you need to stop them messing with your own alliances, for instance, or getting too strong if you defeat your main enemy. Tactics could include sowing discord amongst their allies, or maybe using secret diplomacy to undermine their regional standing.
A delicate game.
Very. You might need to weaken a troublesome ally of yours, but not so much that the Middle King can just swoop in and fill the power vacuum. It's a balancing act.
What if one of your allies actually defects to the middle king? That's a tricky scenario. The text suggests you might even need to make a temporary peace, an accommodation with that stronger middle king, just to manage the immediate fallout and stabilize the situation.
Wow, okay. Constant adaptation. Now, this concept of attack in the rear, Parshnigraha, tell us about that.
Right, Beshnigraha. It's about exploiting a situation where your main opponent is busy fighting someone else.
So while they're distracted,
Exactly. You strike at their rear, maybe hitting a weaker allied kingdom supporting them or cutting their supply lines. It disrupts them, diverts their resources, and might remove a future threat to you.
makes sense. Does it always work?
Not necessarily. The text points out that a really strong king, especially one who has just won a major victory, is usually better prepared to defend against such attacks. Mobilization speed, resources, preparedness, these are key.
And fortifications.
Fortifications are crucial too, yes, both for defending against a rear attack and potentially as a base to launch one from. It's both an offensive and defensive consideration.
Okay, exploiting distractions while guarding your own back. Let's turn inward now, managing internal threats. How does the text suggest dealing with oligarchies or weak kings within conquered territories?
With oligarchies ruled by a few, the text actually suggests conquering them can be quite effective for gaining control,
Really? Why?
because they tend to be more unified and decisive than, say, a fractured kingdom. Once you control the ruling group, you often control the state.
So how do you manage them?
A mix of methods: diplomacy with those who might cooperate, force against those who resist, and actively sowing dissension among them.
Divide and conquer.
Pretty much. Using secret agents, spreading rumors, maybe false accusations, aiming to break their unity and disperse the weaker factions so they can't band together against you.
And what about a weak king who's under attack? What's the advice for them?
The advice isn't just to fight blindly or give up meekly.
No.
No. Instead, seek protection from a stronger power if possible. Or retreat to a strong fort, preserve your resources, and wait for a better opportunity. It also stresses assessing the type of aggressor.
How does that help?
Well, are they driven by justice, greed, or just pure brutality? Knowing that helps tailor the response. Maybe subversion works against one, diplomacy against another, or perhaps just digging in and resisting is the only option.
Adapting the defense to the attacker. Okay, if we zoom out again, how do all these pieces fit into Cotillia's overall foreign policy framework? What are the big principles?
It's incredibly strategic, very pragmatic, some would say realist, and highly dynamic. It emphasizes adaptability.
Key concepts.
Well, there's the idea of active versus passive policies. There are the 6 methods we've touched on: peace, war, staying quiet, preparing, seeking protection, dual policy, and how they interconnect.
Right.
Crucially, there's the understanding of power dynamics, not just military, but intellectual, psychological, and the famous circle of states, or mandala.
Ah, yes, the mandala theory. Explain that briefly.
It's basically a conceptual map. The king sees himself at the center, his immediate neighbors are potential enemies, the states beyond them are potential allies, enemies of his enemies, and then you have the middle and neutral kings further out. It's a framework for analyzing relationships and planning strategy.
A mental map for geopolitics.
Exactly. The whole system is about managing decline, achieving progress, avoiding stagnation. Secrecy and espionage are vital, and alliances are seen as fluid, often temporary. It's all about ensuring the state's long-term security and prosperity.
A comprehensive system indeed. What about some real practical stuff? Lending troops, hostages.
Right, the nitty-gritty. On lending troops, the text advises caution. You might refuse if your own security is weak, or make up an excuse. If you do lend them, maybe insist on joint command, clear terms for their return.
Protect your assets.
Definitely. For a weak king needing help, treaties might involve painful concessions, giving up territory, the treasury, maybe even the king or army as captives or hostages.
Hostages seem quite central.
They were a common way to guarantee treaties. But even here, there's strategy. Choose less important hostages if you can. The text even discusses ways to try and liberate hostages or help them escape, showing a very practical understanding of the risks.
Always thinking ahead. What about dealing with treachery, internal or external?
It differentiates types of treachery. For external threats, especially mixed danger, where an enemy is colluding with traitors inside your kingdom.
A dangerous combination.
Very. The recommended approach is often divide and conquer. Break the link between the external foe and the internal traitors. The four methods, conciliation, gifts, dissension, force, are relevant here too for managing treacherous elements.
And what about the goals of conquest? Does it warn against certain types of gains?
Yes, it cautions against wrong acquisitions, gains made unjustly, perhaps, or pursuing ventures where the outcome is really uncertain. Geography and timing are stressed again as vital for any campaign's success. Ill-gotten gains might cause more trouble than they're worth down the line.
The ends don't always justify the means, perhaps. So finally, planning a campaign itself. What absolutely must a king consider before marching out?
A whole checklist, really. First, a thorough power assessment, yours versus theirs. Not just soldiers, but morale, leadership, resources, stability back home.
A whole picture.
Exactly. Then choosing the right terrain, the right time, the right season, planning troop mobilization and supply lines meticulously, ensuring internal security. You don't want a rebellion while the army's away.
Covering your bases.
Absolutely. Calculating potential gains and losses realistically, and always anticipating potential treachery, both from the enemy and maybe even from allies.
And there's even a warning about campaigns accidentally helping the enemy.
Yes, a crucial point. If you attack someone, but doing so actually removes a check on their rival who happens to be your bigger enemy, you might have just shot yourself in the foot. It requires thinking several steps ahead.
Wow. The complexity is staggering.
Mm-hmm.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it's just remarkable how these strategies from centuries ago still feel relevant.
Isn't it? The core principles calculation, understanding power, adapting, choosing the right tool for the job, whether it's peace or war or something else.
They resonate far beyond ancient statecraft. We really hope this exploration has sparked some thoughts, maybe given folks a new lens to look at complex situations.
What really stands out to you as maybe the most surprisingly applicable takeaway from all this?
For me, maybe it's that constant emphasis on adaptability and context. There's no single magic formula. It's always about assessing this situation, this balance of power now.
That's a great point. The rejection of rigid dogma in favor of pragmatic assessment.
Yeah. Perhaps the next time any of us are facing a tricky negotiation or weighing strategic options in business or even personal life, maybe some of these ancient lessons might just click.
Thinking about managing relationships, pursuing goals, assessing risks and opportunities, the parallels are definitely there if you look for them.
Something to ponder. How might these principles apply in our own worlds? A good thought to leave our listeners with.
Until our next exploration together, keep diving deeper.